Hello and welcome to my weekly live stream where we discuss about the latest techniques in UI design, in code, in some of the latest hottest platforms, and the ones that we love right now is definitely Figma and SwiftUI as well as React. So today I think it's really exciting because you are going to build with me your first iOS app, and this is beginner friendly, especially for beginners, because if you know a lot about SwiftUI, you'll probably find this to be a little bit too easy, which is good. I think it's good that it's too easy because then we can take it to the next level. We can get that out of the way and we can sort of like focus on the finer details, the animations, the aesthetics, the layouts. So today we have a really exciting plan. I'm going to try to cover everything from the ground up. So even if you've never touched SwiftUI or Swift or iOS development, I hope that you're going to be able to follow this. And as usual, I don't like to focus just on the code and the theory and explaining all the things that you want to explore later on. The way that I like to teach is to let you in this beautiful world that is iOS development, but also design and code, and really try to bridge the gap between the two. And it's going to be a very simple app. It's nothing going to be fancy as I usually do, and there's a reason for that. It's because I want you to understand the foundation and how easy it is to build your own app. And it's just going to be, a simple layout like this one. And one of the foundation is the navigation itself. So for example, you want to be able to navigate to a second view and scroll and have as much content as you can. And you want to be able to accommodate different amounts of content. You want to touch a little bit of data, static, and you want to look at some of the options that you have for layout, such as grid layout, such as a stack layout, and a list layout, right? So on top of that, we also have the tab bar, which is essential to any iOS app. And we're gonna have the nav bar, which is also essential to any app. So we're not gonna focus on the custom layouts. I know a lot of designers, they like to kind of go all in on these amazing, crazy concepts, but it comes with a cost, which is that you're going to have to spend a lot more time on understanding how SwiftUI works and how to work with developers, and for them to understand how the design works as well, because they're not the ones who designed it. And so today, that's not what we're going to focus on. We're just going to focus on the basics. And, I want to be able to cover what I believe is a very common use case for any layout, right? So if you look at a lot of courses, they start with a to-do app, right? But how many of you are going to start a to-do app, right? There are so many of them on the App Store. I think most commonly, you're going to be building a layout that looks like this. I mean, if you look at iOS, you have the App Store, the music app, news app, Reddit, or any of these things are going to use these foundations to be able to build those things. And that's kind of like what I want to focus on. And I want to show you that it's so inexpensive to use like a tab bar or a nav bar instead of like creating your own tab bar and your own navigation. And so we're going to learn a lot of these basic things. And let's start with the basics first. I think it's important to understand what kind of resources that you're going to use to guide you through these things. I think a lot of people are really overwhelmed. They don't know where to start, and they don't know where to look for and what to download, what tools to use. What I can say is that start with the best market standards right now, which is Figma and Xcode. And so the reason why I'm saying Figma is because every designer has learned to really enjoy this app. And if you're going to start your first design or your first, using your first design tool, you might as well go with the one that every designer considers to be the gold standard in design tools, and that's Figma. So Figma.com, it's free for individuals, so you don't need to um, you know, you don't need to pay for anything. And they also have a really strong community, such as this, where you can download all of these templates, UI kits, plugins, and they're basically mostly free, like 99% free. They have a ton of resources in terms of teaching you some of the new features, some of the basics, and it's been around for roughly 4 or 5 years now. So it's pretty mature over the years. And we're gonna look at some of these resources. So my camera, just a second. Some of these resources that come for free, such as the iOS UI kit provided by the Figma community, and the 3D illustration pack. So let me just open Figma. They have a desktop app, by the way. And the difference is that you have more options. It's a lot more friendly if you're going to work full time on it. Of course, it works great on the browser. But the thing about working on the browser, even though it's great for cross-platform and such, it works for Windows and Mac and all of these things. You're going to miss some of the keyword shortcuts, some of the real estate of the screen. So, I like to use the desktop version of it. And, if you go to community, we have some of these key resources such as the iOS UI kit. And so if you look at this, you're going to find the color system and a lot of the components that you're going to be able to get from the assets here. So if you go to the left tab here, you're going to go to asset, you're going to find your components, and you can just drag and drop these components and create your layout. And if you're starting out in iOS development, this is what you should do. You shouldn't try to create your own layout, but if you have experience, that's fine, which means that, for example, if I'm going to go back to community, we have some of these illustrations that are kind of offered for free, some more UI kit here for free, icon sets, and we have some variations of UI kits for iOS, mockups, and let me take an example of this food delivery app UI kit. And thanks to today's session, you're going to be able to pretty easily recreate some of these UI as a practice. And if you look at the UI, I wouldn't suggest like a custom UI like this one, but it's something that you can definitely learn to do. But for example, I know a lot of designers, they're not familiar with sort of like a tab bar, how it works. So they like to create their own tab bar. They like to create their own nav bar, which is fine. But at the end of the day, you have to consider what is the cost of development and stuff like that. So, that's something that I want to expose you to. But a lot of these screens, for example, the onboarding screen, are fairly easy to do. And it's just, to me, the complication is the navigation. Navigation can be difficult to manage if you've never done iOS development before, which is why I tend to use some of the built-in controls that you're going to find in SwiftUI instead. And also, it's a lot more cross-platform, which means it's going to translate well to the different other platforms such as iPad and Watch OS and Mac OS eventually. So, it's fine if you want to go like this. I want to show you that it's possible to find these custom layouts, but I definitely want you to study some of these main controls that are inexpensive, that requires like a few lines of code for each of these things, including the calendar. iOS provides all of these things, all of these time selection. If you were to recreate these from scratch, it's just a lot of efforts to do. And color picker, it's already provided. The share sheets, some of these controls for sliders, some of these popover menu and contextual menu, the SF symbols as well. So what you want to do is to download some of these design resources at developer.apple.com/design/resources, and this is where you're going to find SF symbol. What is SF symbol? Is your collection of free icons that are provided by Apple that is consistent with the whole iOS design language. And most importantly, you're going to be able to use these directly in the code without having to import or export anything from the design tool. So it's super inexpensive to use. So you're going to want to download this. You're going to want to download some of these resources for different design tools. So if you're using Sketch, you're using Adobe XD, which are really good tools as well for design. But if you're using Figma, you're going to go to the community for that. They also have one for macOS, watchOS, and so on. But today we're going to focus on iOS and not iPadOS yet, but it's fairly similar to two. It's just that the screen is bigger and you're going to have to deal with some of the adaptiveness later on. But today we're not going to cover that because we already have a lot of things to cover. And what else we're going to look at? Another thing that I like to use is a plugin. So we have a lot of plugins in Figma that lets you really boost your productivity in Figma. So if you go to community and you're going to switch to plugins right here, let's see, plugins, you're going to find a lot of plugins created by the community. And one is called SwiftUI Inspector. I always mistake this part to be like a search field. Let me see. I have to say this is getting pretty crowded and it's hard to navigate because like they put this thing and it's like really much in the way. But you know, I'm gonna bring like a lot of these things directly linked from the description in my YouTube video. And so the one that I like is called SwiftUI Inspector. And let me see if I remember where they put the search. Where did they put the search field? Okay, this is not going well. I thought this was a search, and wow. Okay, I'm confused now. Sorry about this. Okay, there you go. They moved it. This is a very recent change, and so for those who are used to the old UI, you know, they don't see that there's a search here at the top, and especially with a UI like this, where you know the icon here is very much blending in with the main UI, then you get very confused. But anyways, it's here. And it's good that you know we do this together, but I'm sure a lot of you are going to find a hard time finding that as well. We're going to go for SwiftUI, and we're going to install it. And of course, you can search the community file as well. And yeah, so SwiftUI, this is great. For those who are subscribers to DesignCode, I provide all the source design files for the iOS app that we actually are building, and it's currently in test flight in beta mode. So this is a real app. This is not some fake app. And if you watch my previous video, you will see that I explain the entire development stage and some of the iOS development tips. And those are for people who have done SwiftUI before. But today we're going to focus on the basics. So if you never touched SwiftUI before or iOS development before, this video is for you. So here, we're going to try to build some of these elements. And I think as a practice later on, you're going to be able to practice and maybe recreate some of these other layouts that is not covered. Keep in mind that this is going to last for about an hour and a half, so there's a limited amount of time and elements that I can cover today. But going back to the SwiftUI Inspector, this is what is going to allow you to bring some of these colors and gradients and just copy the code. Because just like in CSS, whenever you copy the code of you know, the different gradients and stuff like that, it's just a lot of code. And you know, this SwiftUI Inspector is going to help you a lot in terms of translating some of those tricky things to code to be ready for you. You can just copy the code directly and paste that. And they also have a feature where, you know, for the Pro version, you can get the whole layout with auto layout. But you know, if you're willing to pay for that, but otherwise you can use it for the basic features such as copying some of the shapes and some of the gradients colors. So that's really useful for me. So let's take a look at the project itself. Today we are going to focus on some of the basic layouts. And you can see we have a preview, and you have your main code here. And I also want to teach you sort of like the foundation of how to organize your projects. You know, where do you put your views, and how do you start from scratch? How do you, if you bring in a navigation view, then how do you bring that in? Because it's not easy necessarily for someone who's never understood the whole structure of iOS. If you're gonna bring a tab bar, how are you gonna organize those things? How are you gonna import your assets? How do you organize your components so that they can be reusable? And then we're gonna cover a little bit of data, just enough for you to be dangerous and be able to prototype some of the basic stuff. And so that's essentially what we're gonna try to cover today. And again, all the source files are going to be provided to subscribers of DesignCode, including also the design files that you find here. And you know, some of these design files are like hundreds of hours of work, which is why we appreciate so much our subscribers who allow us to bring these really premium content, and for us to spend a lot of time teaching you guys how to create iOS app, how to design and code, and all of those things. In terms of resources, I think it's important to start with a solid direction of where to find the techniques that you need. One of the gold standard, I would say, is the SwiftUI by example, or hacking with Swift, kind of like the same umbrella. And you know, they have the whole curriculum where they're gonna explain to you what SwiftUI is and what are some of the differences between, you know, Swift before with UIKit versus SwiftUI, and then there's a lot of things that they're gonna show you in terms of techniques. And likewise for us at DesignCode, we also have a SwiftUI handbook where we have right now an ever expanding number of sections. We have 87 sections with 7 hours of videos. And what we like to do is that we actually provide both the design and the code as well. So not only do we show you how to do all of these things, but also not just the text, but also the video. So this is unique because if you look for a lot of these resources, typically the video is not provided, and typically the source files are not provided, or the design files. So we try to solve that for subscribers, and you're going to be able to download the source file for, you know, all of these projects. Some of them are pretty, you know, are a lot more complex, and I like to do that, you know, and sometimes I show like a pretty complex sort of setup, and you know, I think it's a lot of fun. I think it's much needed in the market because not everyone does that. Like I said, most people focus on the basics and the theory and, you know, and the language itself, but I try to focus also on the layout and what is the use case and what is the design that you can take it from. And so that's why I provide with all my live streams sources to these design files, and of course I give you directions in terms of where can you find other resources, because, you know, I think it's important to find a little bits and pieces from everywhere. So as I mentioned before, there are a lot of great resources, such as, you know, these 3D illustrations that I believe is free if I look at their text. So you're going to be able to use this, and you know, it's fun. You know, if you've never done, let's say, design before, and if you've never done illustrations before, we have our own resources, and you know, you can also look at those things in the description. So, all right. So this is the layout, and we're going to start from scratch. Now, in order to start your own iOS app, what do you need? What are the requirements? First of all, you need a Mac. I think that goes without saying. If you're focusing on iOS, if you're focusing on Apple platforms, then you should own some Apple platform devices, such as an iPhone, such as a Mac. And unfortunately, you won't be able to develop an iOS app on a Windows machine. And you know, Sketch, for example, only works for the Mac, but Figma does work for both platforms. Excuse me. So Mac, and then you're gonna need also Xcode. So if you Google Xcode, today we're going to focus on Xcode 12, which is the latest version. And if you're more adventurous, you can also go to developer.apple.com, and they provide beta on some of the new versions of Xcode. And I think it's really exciting because WWDC is going to come very soon, in about 2 months. And that's when we're going to start focusing very soon on iOS 15, right? And Xcode 13. And you know, every single year we have a lot of new APIs, a lot of new exciting things that you can do. But for today, we're going to focus on Xcode 12. And if you want to download it, you're going to go to the App Store and you're going to search for Xcode. It's a big app, but it provides a lot of things. It's like the jack of all trades. You can create games with it. You can create AR experiences. You can create for all 5 platforms, such as iOS, iPadOS, Apple Watch OS, and Mac OS and tvOS. So a lot of things that you can do with Xcode. And when you try to do many things, right, that's when you get a pretty bad rating. I'm just kidding, but yeah, it's not, it tries to do a lot of things, and yes, a lot of people have performance issues, but nothing is perfect in life, right? What I can say is that I love Xcode, and despite its faults, its quirks, it's an amazing app, and especially I love SwiftUI. So once you have Xcode installed, you're gonna be so let me just close this one. I'm going to hopefully have that as a reference and not stumble in my steps. Right now I have 12.5, and that's because my main Xcode has some beach ball issues lately. And so when you open Xcode for the first time, you're gonna want to create a new Xcode project, right? So you can see this is the version right now. I'm on 12.5. The public one is 12.4, and if you're going into the beta version of Xcode, you're gonna have two. You have the beta version, and then you're gonna have the public version. So let me just go back to my steps. All right, so we're gonna create a new project, and we're going to select. So this is very important. I think by default it's set to multi-platform, but we're going to focus on iOS because this is your first app. I don't want to overwhelm you. The multi-platform one has some more complexity, which I think you're going to learn soon. But for now, we're going to focus on the easiest platform, which is by far iOS. But on top of that is the most mature platform, the most used platform. And so I think that's the most exciting one. So we're going to select iOS and then app. And then this is where we're going to name it my first iOS app, or whatever, my first app if you want. Then, for the team itself, you're going to need an Apple developer account. So if you want to do that, it's free, by the way. And so, as long as you're not submitting your app to the App Store, you don't need to pay. And so you need to create an account, but if you already have an Apple ID, you can just log into that, and that's going to be part of your team. So you're going to be selecting that and logging in using your Apple ID. The organization is going to be your domain name in reverse. So, if it's twitter.com, it would be com.twitter, right? And so for me is io.DesignCode. We're going to select SwiftUI and SwiftUI app. So you have SwiftUI with storyboard. Storyboard is the old way to do it with UI kits, and yeah, it's I'm not gonna explain that. It's a kind of like more kind of a drag and drop stuff and more like a visual editor. But I feel like SwiftUI is the good balance between the two worlds, where you don't have the limitations of storyboard, but you have a lot more power of code, and it's still very friendly though. Now SwiftUI app. So like SwiftUI is a new way, and it's focused on UI. Swift is the language, so the language is the platform. It's the main sort of framework, and UI Kit is the old way to create UI. So it's a framework for UI, but using the old way combined with storyboard and interface builder. But SwiftUI replace the old way of doing that. So SwiftUI, as the name implies, Swift UI for user interface. And so that's the new way. And it has been around for about 2 years. And it's really exciting because it has matured. It's covering more than 85% of user base now. And so most developers who are building a new app who don't have legacy issues at their company will select SwiftUI because it's easy to learn and it's a lot more transferable between, let's say, React and Flutter to SwiftUI, right? Like, so let's say you're a developer or a designer and you want to have an iOS development career. Well, that's great, but how do you bridge that between what you know now and what you're gonna learn with SwiftUI? If you're gonna learn UIKit, it's like you have to completely rewire your brain from React or from Flutter. But if you go from Flutter to SwiftUI, it's super easy. If you go from CSS to SwiftUI, super easy. If you go from React to SwiftUI and vice versa, it's super easy because they all share the same concept. So that's why SwiftUI is great. The only part where UIKit is great is, let's say you've never done any of those things and you want to work for a company that has a lot of legacy issues and they have to support like 99% of user base, then UIKit is made for that. But if you're new, SwiftUI, okay? And I think that's really important to understand. So creating our first app, and I'm gonna save that to my downloads. And so, I'm gonna click on play right away because that takes a little bit of time, and I'm gonna maximize this. Okay. So this is what it's gonna look like. This is your first experience with an iOS development, and these are the files, and this is the entire thing is Xcode. You have access to the play button, which allows you to play to a simulator. We're gonna deal with that later. But otherwise, you have a bunch of devices here that you can select. And these are the ones that allows you to build your layout against those devices, such as iPhone 12 Pro and whatnot. And so, yeah, this is going to take a little bit of time for your first run. And this is your inspector. So what is cool about SwiftUI is that if you don't have a lot of experience with SwiftUI, the inspector can really come in handy because it gives you all of these options that might not be familiar for someone who's never done Swift before. So, and what else? We are going to have some design, okay, like this one. First of all, you're gonna use Sask or Figma, and you're gonna be inspecting the design and getting the distances and getting the dynamic type and the font sizes and the gradient, the colors, and all of these things. You also want to export these assets here, okay? And so when you're gonna export your assets from Figma or from Sketch, you're gonna want to use one of these formats. And the one that you're gonna use in iOS is called a PDF, and I know a lot of people think that PDF is only for, like these documents and stuff like that. But curiously, you can use PDF for also vector assets. If it's not a vector asset, you can use PNG. But I like to use PDF because it's scalable, which means that I don't have to export to 3 different types. And for beginners, definitely you don't need to understand those things about resolutions, which can be a bit scary for someone who's never done that before. So just export everything to PDF. Okay, so you're gonna click on export, and you are going to select PDF, and you're gonna export that. And let me just minimize this here. It's not minimizing. Okay, let me just do it manually. There you go. Okay, so let me see. I just want to make sure that I have the assets. Okay, so you're gonna end up with some of these assets right here, and we're gonna import those assets. So I believe that I forgot to bring those assets. No, they're here. Okay. All right, so these are the assets you're going to be exporting from Figma. If I zoom in, you're going to see that they're all in vectors, which means that it's fully scalable, and I don't need to worry about 1x, 2x, 3x, right? And I think that's great for beginners. So back to your iOS app. Okay, you're going to go to your assets catalog, and this is where you're going to customize your app icon. This is fairly easy. It's very straightforward. You just drag and drop the image based on the resolution. And you can also have like your colors. And, you know, it's a lot of fun. And we are going to bring the image first. So I'm going to drag and drop these PDF images. There you go. And like I said, typically you have to worry about 2x and 3x, but because we're dealing with vectors, we don't need to do that. And that's the fun of it. So, content view is your main UI, your first UI, okay? This is your project, and I know it's overwhelming at first. You don't need to worry too much. Of course, you can explore, such as the navigation is right here. You know, this is your project settings. You want to change the name. You want to make sure that it's only working for portrait and not landscape. You want to support different version and stuff like that. You can definitely explore here. And also, if you want to sign in as part of a team, so that you can test on your iOS device, you're going to need to do that. But otherwise, if you test on the simulator, you don't need to do any of these things. So let me just focus on the SwiftUI aspect. And the fun part is that you have your preview here, and that's all you need to know, right? If there's one thing you need to know when you open Xcode for the first time, is that this is your code and this is your UI, okay? And just have fun, because once you have fun, the rest is gonna come naturally. You're gonna start being motivated, and you're gonna start being curious about how to do this and to do that, and that's where the tutorials from SwiftUI by example or the handbook is gonna come in handy. And so my goal today is just to get you started. So let's start with the most fun part, which is the card here, right? You know, the title here. So I'm gonna copy and paste the text. Okay. There you go. Make sure that there's no title. There's no space. Code can be a little bit unforgiving sometimes, which means you have to be careful about some of these things, which I think why a video like this one can be useful, so that you don't make some of these common mistakes. Now I'm going to remove the padding, or maybe not yet. So let me just focus a little bit on the inspector for the first 2 minutes, because it's important to know at first what kind of option, because the way that it works is, imagine you're in Figma, right? You're selecting an element, and this is your inspector. The inspector gives you the options to that element. Well, in SwiftUI, it works the same way. Instead, we are focusing on the code. We select the code, and then we get the inspector. So for example, I select the text, and I get the options for that text. Okay? So the same if I select from this preview here, I get that option, and this is selected. And this is why SwiftUI is kind of exciting, is that it's kind of like a marriage of the two worlds, rather than, Storyboard, for example, will only focus on the visual, and then a UI kit and Swift will only focus on the code and not the visual. So SwiftUI is like saying, okay, let's make sure that the two goes well together. And so when I select here, I can select here, and I can select here. I can double click here, and it gives me a focus on this. I can change the text from here, or I can change the text from here. Okay. And yeah, it's important to know. And then I can change, let's say, the option for the fonts. I'm going to change that to title. And when I change it here, it adds my code directly here. So I know exactly what happened and what is the reaction to those changes. So I can change this to bold, for example, and I can change the color to blue. And so, you know, I get the equivalent of all of those things in code. And when I delete in one portion, it deletes here as well. And you know, when you get started, that's kind of like what you want to try to do at first. So the second thing is, if you want to add more elements, okay? So for example, I want to add a second line of text. And so there's a key element here that you need to be familiar with, is the plus button that's called library. So I'm going to click on it, and this is my playground. I want to explore all the things I can bring into my UI, including a button, a color picker, a form, an edit button. So yeah, these are the glorious days of, like, if you remember, you know, as a web designer, we used to have front page, we used to have these WYSIWYG editor where you have like these controls you can drag and drop into the UI. Well, that's kind of like that, but better. And so you have access, you have the list of everything you can do, the controls such as a slider, the text field, the text elements. So in this case, you can search for text, and you can just drag and drop your text here. So why I'm saying here is because it's going to create the structure for you. And this is where you're going to need to be a little bit familiar with the way SwiftUI works, and the same with React. So let me drag and drop right underneath the first text, and there you go. I have my second text right here, and let me double click here, and I can just paste the text, and then boom, press enter, and then I have my text here. Now, what it did that you might not have realized is that it created a VStack. So what is a VStack, and why does it need to do that? Well, just like in React, you need to always have a main container, like a one parent container. If you don't do that, it's going to crash everything. And unfortunately, like I said, code can be a little bit unforgiving. And that's why it's important that you understand the basics of some of these requirements, okay? So if you have one element, you don't need a VStack or the parent container. But if you have multiple elements, that's when you start needing a parent container. And so you can see that I have a padding on this one, but I don't have a padding on this one. So maybe I can decide to remove it. And when I remove it, I remove this part as well. And instead, I can select the VStack, which is my container, and I can add the padding on my container. So like that, it just makes more sense. And in terms of alignment, I can do the same, because the container controls the alignment of all the items, just like in CSS Grid and CSS Flex or Auto Layout in Figma. It lets you control the layout. And so let me, you know, align this to the left. I'm going to click right here. It creates the code for me, and then it updates the preview. If I want to add more spacing, for example, I want to have more spacing between the title and the text, I can just add 16 here, and then it adds the spacing for me. Really exciting stuff, right? And so let's do some more stuff. Let's add another line of text. Okay. And again, plus, or you can do a keyboard shortcut, Command-Shift-L, and this is where I'm going to find another text and drag and drop. But here, since I already have my container, I can drag and drop directly into the code instead of directly into the preview. So for example, I can drag and drop here. Okay, so it makes its way, and I can change the text from the code as long as I respect the rules of code. So for example, anything that opens has to be closed. A beginning of the code has to be closed by the end of the code. Otherwise, it's going to crash your app. So welcome to the coding world. And those are some of the rules that, you know, as you learn, get into the code, you have to get used to. Because if you don't do those things, the computer doesn't understand what the hell you're doing. And the computer needs to understand. The computer has very strict rules in terms of reading how you're building your layout. And that's why if you're opening a curly brace, it has to be closed. And in fact, when you, sorry, this one that close here, this one that close here, and you can see by the yellow pops, the yellow outline and background, it tells you where it ends. You can also double click on the curly braces. It's going to tell you where it ends. Double click here, double click the parentheses, tells you where it ends. And just by doing this small exercise, it will help you so much to understand how code works, right? You need to understand that everything that opens needs to close. Otherwise, the computer does not understand. It kind of like, 404 can't compute. So that's how it works. Now, SwiftUI. Why SwiftUI is exciting? SwiftUI starts with the content first and then ends with the container. In CSS, you start with the container and you end to the content. So that's why we started with the text, and that's why SwiftUI also centers everything by default, which means that it adapts to all platforms by default. Think about it, right? So if your text is centered, you don't need to adapt for the Apple Watch, which is way smaller. But if you put it to the top left, on the Apple Watch might work because you have a small screen, but on the iPad, it will not work because your text is to the top left and you have a lot of empty space in the middle. And so that's why in SwiftUI, everything centers by default. And that's just like some of the logics you need to understand when you switch from CSS to SwiftUI. The same with the size of your elements. In SwiftUI, everything starts with the minimum size. In CSS, everything starts with the maximum size. Think about a div. When you create a div, it always takes the maximum size, but in SwiftUI, it starts with the minimum size. Again, this helps with the adaptiveness of your layout, and it's ensuring that everything centers by default. So I think that's some of the things that you need to understand. Another thing you need to understand is the difference between the controls and the modifiers. Okay, so the controls are like the text. So if I click on the plus sign again, you can see that I have the controls here, which is the button, like the text, the date picker, the VStack. And then you have the modifiers, which is the second tab. And these are kind of your properties. So everything you see here in your inspector is a modifier. Is essentially adding a styling, it adds options to your elements. And I think that's really important to understand. But the curious thing that you need to understand about SwiftUI is that everything happens in one spot. In CSS, you have the structure of HTML, and then you have the logic code, and then you have the CSS file, which are all separate. But in SwiftUI, everything is in one place, which means that your text is styled by the modifiers, and it's contained by the VStack. And if you want to add the logic, you can easily add that part of the states, and everything just is so compressed and so compact. And that makes it super easy to read when it comes to your layout. So you look at this layout here, you have a container, and then you have 3 text elements. This one is a title, and this one is bold. That's all you need to read, right? That's essentially what it is. Now, modifiers are super exciting because every single modifier is like a container, which means that you can have as many of the same modifiers as you want. You can have many backgrounds, many padding, and we're gonna get there later. But yeah, I'm just getting a little bit ahead of myself because I'm really excited every time I talk about SwiftUI. And so let's see. Let's talk about the background. So we have the text, and obviously we might want to bring the image. So let's go to the insert menu. And again, please take some time to look at the modifiers, all the things, because if you're a designer, this is what excites you. You want to know, oh my God, I can do a blend mode, I can do a blur, I can adjust the brightness. That's amazing. Like some of these things, are so cool for a designer because they're the equivalent of what you can do in the design tool and more. Because remember that code is 10x more powerful than design, because code is the underlying platform that creates everything, including Figma, including all of these design tools. So you can do anything you want in code. And so when you have a platform like SwiftUI, you can just do everything as long as you explore and you have your curiosity with you, and you respect the rules of code essentially. So now I covered the views, I covered the controls, I covered the modifiers, and the third one is for the snippets, and then we have the images that I have imported earlier. And so the third one is the colors. So you can organize your colors, you can adapt to light mode and dark mode. This is fairly easy. I can show that really quickly. So for example, you can right click here and you can create a new color set, and let's say you're gonna call this one primary, and here you can just like change the content of the color to hex, and you can bring your color codes, right? And you can set the light mode and dark mode, and you're going to be able to reference that from the code. And so once you have created this here, you're going to be able to find that in your insert menu, which is right here. So whatever I created in the assets catalog was brought here, and on top of that I have the default version and the dark mode version, which is perfect for adapting for dark mode. So that's a little crash course on the colors. And every time you change some of the structure, you're gonna need to resume your preview. And yeah, let's deal with the background now. Okay. Oh yes, let's deal with the image. So again, when you drag and drop, you can drag and drop to the code, or you can drag and drop to the preview. So like this, okay? And there you go. So it creates the code, it referenced the name being whatever I set in my assets catalog. So this is the name as it is. The same with the reference to the color would be done essentially the same way. So quotes, start and end, and then the name. So that's how you reference all of these things. And then we're gonna deal with the background. So oh yeah, before I get fully into the code, I think it's important to understand also this part, which is this is the basic things you can do, like the most popular things you can do, such as for text you have the fonts, for the stack you have the spacing, alignment, and stuff like that, and the frame size. But then you have the modifier. So as I explained, the modifier is all of these properties that you can add. For example, background is not here, so I'm gonna add this background. And boom, it creates the background for me. So the same for corner radius. I know designers will love corner radius. I'm gonna search for corner radius, and then boom, I have my corner radius, and I can set it to 20. It creates the property for me when I add that from my modifier right here. So there you go. Super exciting stuff, right? Now I'm gonna I don't want to focus on just this, because this is just far more efficient. As once you get used to your code and to how code works, you can't go back. It's like once you start using a Mac, you can't go back to Windows. I'm sorry. So this is what's happening, and you have your VStack and you have your background. Okay, so I'm gonna minimize the inspector. I'm just gonna focus here. And so I have my background. As long as I respect the structure of the code, and Xcode is going to be happy, I can change this right here. Okay. And I can also add more. So here, for example, the background, when you double click on it, it gives you a default thing, and it's not really friendly, by the way, because most people are going to double click on it and they're like, whoa, what's going on? Well, why it starts bugging? Well, that's because it was expecting a color, and the color is blue. Okay? And so a background is a modifier that adds a background to your element, right? And the thing that you need to know is that it can be anything here. It can be a color, it can be anything else. In this case, we want it to be a gradient. So now for the gradient, we're gonna create a gradient in Figma, and then we're gonna use SwiftUI Inspector. We're gonna go to colors and click on linear gradient. So with this, I can just replace the color. So remember, starting and end of my parentheses, and whatever is in between, I can replace that by my gradient. So this is the gradient, and now I have my gradient. So that's why this is a lovely tool for designers, because some of these are pretty hard to code from scratch, and so you're just replacing the color by gradient instead. And there you go. Now, in terms of the text color, of course, I can change the text color by doing .foreground color, like this. Now, one thing that I need to understand about Xcode is that, so you have your element, and then you have the modifier. The modifier starts with a dot, and when you press dot, you have this beautiful auto-completion that again is contextual depending on the element that you're selecting or that is up against. So in this case is a text element, and so I can search for, you're gonna get used to these things, but in order to color a text, I need to use a modifier called a foreground color. And here I can set the color. I can set it to white as well. Okay. And just like in CSS, I can apply to all of the elements at once by applying, instead of on a single element, I'm going to cut that and paste that here. So it's going to apply to all of them at once. And so again, you're going to get used to all the options for modifiers and controls. So in this case, let's say I want to set opacity. Boom, opacity 0.7. Okay, opacity. Boom, opacity 0.7. I want to have blending mode. Sure, no problem. Blending mode. Boom, blending mode, darken, right? So I can set overlay, anything you want, right? That's like, don't be scared of code. This is all you need to do. You just need to understand what are the limitations of code, what are the rules of code, and once you understand that, understand what are the options that you can do with code, and just play with those things. And what goes with what? It's just like Lego blocks. You need to know that this Lego block goes with another Lego block. And once you understand that, then the sky's the limit. All right, so I have my basic layout here, okay, and I have my image. There you go. And maybe I want to make this, so by default, it's gonna take camera again. By default, the image that is being referenced is going to take the minimum size of the image. So if you have a giant image, you're going to have a problem, which means that you're going to use something called resizable. Notice that I'm not using the plus anymore, and that's because once you get used to CSS and HTML, you just remember all of these things by heart, and your muscle memory is going to come into play. So I'm going to need to resize, and also I'm going to need to aspect ratio. So I'm going to set it to fit. And you can also set, let's say, the frame size. So frame size is when you don't necessarily want it to grow to the maximum. You want it to limit it to, let's say, a fixed width or a fixed height, just like in Figma. In this case, let's see. I want to limit my my height to 128. So I'm going to set height 128. Okay. And there you go. And so I also want to set to the maximum width. So max width. Notice that I'm using 2 different frames. So every single modifier is a container. And some of these rules, for example, you cannot have height and max height. You cannot have height and max width combined. So max width infinity is like saying, okay, I know that you're using the minimum size, but I actually want you to use the maximum size. And that's why I'm specifically telling the code to use the maximum possible. So that's why I'm using max width infinity. Infinity means maximum possible. So there you go. And then the size of my card is going to be a width of 252. So another thing that you need to understand is also every single modifier is going to have a structure. It's kind of like a container, which means that everything needs to be done with the proper structure and order. And we're gonna get there. So let me see. Let's say I set my frame here, and I want to have a height of 329. Okay, so you can see that it sets my height, and I also want to have a width. So the width has to be before the height, by the way. Again, some of the rules of code. And 252. Okay, so now I have my width of 252, and notice that it's trying to do its best to fit the text as best as it can. So right now, it's using these ellipses by default. And what you can do to solve this is to use what we call a line limit, so that I'm giving priority to the title. And as long as I don't have a problem with the size, so I'm guessing that, maybe I have a problem with the text. Maybe I can limit this. Okay. And this I can set it to 16. Yeah, so depending on what you want, and you can limit the line limit and so some of these things. Oh, I think it's because of my spacing. A lot of these things are going to come into play, and when they come into play, they're going to try to push the content, and when it doesn't have space for the content, that's why it's used the ellipses at the end. So now that I adjust the spacing, and I'm going to fix, let's say, the line limit, I'm going to set it to 2, and now I have no problem. So my title can fit 2 lines, and my text can fit 2 lines. And so, you need to understand some of these rules. So now that I have my cards, I need a container for that. And what I'm going to do now is to set this inside, let's say, an H tag. Okay? And I want to start creating components because I'm going to have multiple cards. I'm not going to just have a single card. And I think it's important to start using components. Just like in Figma, at some point, you're not going to focus on a single card, and you're going to be reuse it multiple times across your whole design. So your cards are going to start becoming components. Okay? And so the same with the code. As long as you have a container, and again, super important rule, if you don't have a container, you're not going to be able to create a component. But now that I have a container called the H tag, so H tag is for horizontal stack and V stack is for vertical stack. And H tag means that we're going to, move this like horizontally, and we're going to be able to scroll the content like that. So I'm going to command click on the V stack. So when you command click on it, you have the options. And some of these options are really good, such as embedding in H tag, as I just did earlier, which allows you to, automatically wrap your element inside a container. And right now, I want to focus on extracting subview. Extracting subview, a subview is kind of like a component in Swift. And so when I do that, it's going to separate the component from my main structure. Okay? And nowadays everything is component based, including all the platforms such as Flutter and React and Figma and Sketch. And that's why I think it's important to understand this concept of like creating Lego blocks and then putting them together and reuse them as much as possible. So in this case, I'm going to call this card view. And when I change this here, it's changed here as well. And when I do that, I want to resume, and I want to be able to, let's say, use multiple cards like this. So now, because I have an H tag, it's going to pile them next to each other. Another thing that I can do, which is really cool, is command click on a card, and there's an option called repeat. Boom, it creates 5 copies of my card, just like that. So that's the power of code. Code allows you to easily, make it more efficient to reuse elements and to program things, to automate things, so that you don't have to do these things manually. So, so in this case, I am iterating using a for each. A for each is like a loop. I'm duplicating it. Think of a duplicate tool that I'm duplicating multiple times. In this case, is 5 times the cards. So I can change to 10, and it's going to create 10 cards instead of 5. For performance, I'm going to stick to 5. And what if I want to scroll it? Command click on HStack, and it doesn't have embed in scroll view, so I'm going to use a VStack first, and I'm going to change VStack to scroll view. Okay. And by default, the scroll view is going to be vertical. So this is another important thing you need to know, is to click on the play button, and this is where you can start interacting with your preview. So now, because I have a scroll view, I can scroll my element. But what I want is to be able to scroll horizontally. So there's an option in scroll view. I don't know if they have it here, but they definitely have it here. Well, you're gonna get used to these things. When you have an element, oftentimes you can open parentheses, and you're gonna find a lot of options. Okay. Now, most often it's gonna give you the first option. The first option gives you, all access to all of these options. So you can see here, I double click on it, and it gives me the option. But be careful of the structure of your code. Sometimes it gets in the way of your current code, and you're gonna have to focus back on just some of these options, such as you don't need the content. So just the parentheses. So now I have vertical and then shows indicator. Okay, just be careful. Okay, this is where sometimes code can be unfriendly, and autocompletion can come in, and you're like, okay, it just broke my layout. What happened? Well, just be careful. Whenever you open a parentheses, it has to close. Curly braces and all these things. You're gonna get used to these rules, by the way, and that's why I'm gonna be sharing the source file, for you to download and check against your own code as you follow these steps. So you can see by default it's set to vertical, but I can change it to horizontal, and when I do that, boom, I can scroll horizontally, just like this. Beautiful. And if I don't want to see the scroll bar, because oftentimes when I have this layout, I don't want to show the scroll bar, so I'm going to change from true to false. So now no more scroll bar. I want to add some padding. So on my HStack, add a padding. Those who don't know, by default, the padding is set to 16. If you don't customize it, you can customize it to 20 if you want. You can customize to 8. But if you don't specify it, it's set to 16 by default, or you just don't need to put it at all. So there you go. And more options. So HStack, I might want to set a spacing of, let's say, 16 between the elements. Okay. And then there you go. So this is my basic layout, and this is my basic content. All right, so let me just check what I want to do. All right, let's go to the second screen, because it's kind of boring to have like one single screen, and you want to start having some sort of a navigation. Okay, and most apps are going to use the nav bar and the tab bar. So what we're going to do here is to start using the nav bar first. We're going to start with the nav bar. And so I'm going to put this scroll view. Right now, I don't have embed in navigation view, so I'm going to embed in VStack first. And I'm going to use navigation view. Again, this is a control. You can find that in the insert menu if you search for navigation, right? So all of these things well documented Um, I know I don't want to explain every single element, but they're all there. So if you search for scroll view, it's here. It explains to you. It gives you a sample code in terms of how to use it. The same with navigation view, right? It explains what it does, and it gives you a sample code of how to use it. Okay? And the documentation has grown so much over the past year, right? Like I remember the first few weeks of SwiftUI, we didn't have this at all. Like we only had maybe this. That's it. So we're really at a good stage for learning SwiftUI, and the documentation is awesome. Speaking of documentation, it is important that you know the shortcut. So Option, click on any of these elements. It's going to give you the documentation directly as a popover. But on top of that, there's a beautiful link here at the bottom right that you can click, and then you get to more documentation and more navigation within that. So you can see it gives you beautiful examples as to what you can do, and the relationships, the view modifiers, so many things to explore, right? I just want to give you access to that because this is what you want to explore later on after you watch this video. So, all right, navigation view. Right now, it's not showing anything, and that's because I don't have a title. When you use a navigation view, you're going to want to set the navigation title, and then we're going to set it to, let's say, Learn SwiftUI. So the navigation title has to be set within the first element of the navigation view. Again, another code rule, but that's just the way it is. You're gonna get used to it. So now it creates my, title here, and I can also set another scroll view. Okay. Because I have two scroll view. I want to have one scroll view for this, and I want to have another scroll view vertical for the whole content. So scroll view. Okay, there you go. Boom. Doesn't this look familiar to you? Most apps on iOS look like this. You have a title that's scrollable, and then you have the content that is horizontally scrollable. So there you go. That's all you need to do. This is all the code you need to create this structure here. That's just beautiful. And you have the title, you can change it, and it does automatically the little transition to the navbar. And as you learn navbar, you can add buttons to your navbar and stuff like that. But yeah, this is for you to explore. So let's go to another view. And okay, I know, like, I work with a lot of early designers and developers. They like to do everything in one file, but today I want to show you how to create multiple files. I think this is really important to know. So the new screen that I want to create is the detail view. So it's going to look a little bit like this. Of course, we won't have time to go into the details, but let's go and click on new file here. So right click on content view. And now I'm going to create a new file. And the reason why I want to create a new file is so that I don't have like a file with thousands and thousands of lines of code, which is really hard to manage as your project gets bigger. So today I also want to kind of like help you organize your code as your project gets bigger. So first of all, when you create a new file, we're going to select user interface and SwiftUI view. And this one, we're going to call it detail view. Boom. And yeah, I'm not going to redo the layout from scratch. So as long as I respect my code, okay, it's important to respect the code. Select all the VStacks. Okay. See, I double click here. It tells me that this is all my code inside my VStack plus the modifiers. So VStack, the content plus the modifiers. I'm going to copy all of that code. So I know when you start, it's it's hard to copy and paste, but I want to do this because we don't have a ton of time to do all of these things from scratch. So I'm just replacing the text element with all of this code. Okay? And there you go. So this is my layout. I didn't want to start from scratch, and by the way, a lot of people do this. This is not new. And then we're gonna put the whole thing inside a VStack, and we're gonna make it scrollable. So embed everything in scroll view. Boom, it does this, right? But the thing is, what used to be a card, I don't want to have a fixed frame size. So I'm going to remove the frame modifier. Boom, takes the full width, right? That's exactly what I want. Maybe I don't want the corner radius. Remove it. That's it. So that's how you do it. It's not complicated. As long as you understand the rules, you can easily just bring back and forth some of these elements and some of these modifiers. You can move them around and just have fun with it. So again, we're doing that, and we can definitely put some basic content here so that it's not so boring. And let me just set a text. All right. Right, so we have the text. I'm going to put this into a VStack, and now I'm going to put a second text. And then I'm going to put a third text. All right. Just make sure that you don't have like spacing and stuff like that might break the code. But once you have everything, it should look a little bit like this. And we are going to use, as you notice, we always use dynamic type, which is what I recommend to anyone who is starting out. So when you set your dynamic type, you're going to have like these title 3, medium, and headlines, and title 1. So let's see. This one is title 1 dot font dot title, and the second one here is headline, I believe. So font dot headline. Okay, I'm also missing the bold. Okay, and we're gonna align things. Parentheses, alignment. If you're not sure how to write your code, just use the inspector. So here I'm gonna use leading. Leading is left, by the way. And in iOS, instead of using left and right, they're gonna use leading and trailing. And so the rest, I just need to fix the layout. So I'm gonna add some padding, and I'm gonna add some spacing. All right, there you go. This is a pretty common layout, and I have a new view, and I did that in about 5 minutes because I didn't have to redo all of these things from scratch. So the question is, how do we navigate from this view to the detail view, right? So what we want to do is be able to tap here and go to the detail view. What we're going to use is something called a navigation link. Okay, if you want to look at the documentation, tells you how to use it. So here you can see you need to use a navigation link, parentheses, destination, and whatever view you want to call, and then the content. So that's pretty straightforward. Let me drag and drop that. Okay, so my content is going to be my card view, and my destination is going to be the detail view that I just created. And don't forget the parentheses. Okay, so again, I'm just following the documentation. Okay, see, this is really important to understand for a lot of beginners out there. Don't try to just follow what your teacher is doing. Try to also understand how to find the resources and the documentation to go your own way and why it's done that way. And instead of teaching you how to type exactly the same way that I do, I prefer to show you, well, look at the documentation. This is how you do it, right? And just copy, if you're not sure, just copy and paste the whole code and just try to play with it until it breaks. And if it breaks, go back to your steps. And that's it. I think you're gonna do just fine. And if it breaks again, ask the developer. And if they, if for whatever reason they can help you, go to Google or go to Stack Overflow. And I think it's really important for you to understand that. So, navigation link is going to need a navigation view, otherwise it's not going to work. What it does, I tap on it, boom, I have my beautiful second page. On top of that, I'm able to swipe back using the built-in controls. That's all you need to do. Not much more than that, right? Life is beautiful. You don't need to complicate your life, which is why I'm telling a lot of designers, I know you want to create that beautiful, crazy animation, but sometimes you just want to use the default ones. And maybe you only have time and resources to do the basic stuff. And I think that's perfectly normal. That's perfectly fine. You don't need to go all the fancy stuff. So that's it. This is how you do the navigation. And let's look into the tab navigation. And let's see. I'm starting to have like a pyramid of doom, right? So this is what you need to look for. When you start having a lot of what we call is the pyramid of doom, a lot of structure, that's when you start needing to create components and to sort of split your code as much as possible. Now, let's take a look at the basics here. By default, every single project starts with a content view. But obviously, my view here is not my content view. This is kind of like my home view. And maybe I want to have a courses view, a tutorials view, or a more view. And so that's when you kind of need to take out some of the stuff, okay? The first file, okay, this is kind of like your setup. And this is telling you content view is the first thing I'm going to load when I'm loading your app. The content view is kind of like your index.html, if you will, okay? This is your first view, your first page that is going to be loaded. So it's important to understand the structure here. And that's why I'm going to start moving things, because it's going to get complicated really soon if I don't do that, especially when I have a navigation view and a tab view. Okay, the first thing I want to do first is maybe to create a view just for just my card view. I want it to be its own file. Okay, I don't want the card view to be part of the content view, because you don't want your whole list of components to be inside the content view. So let me create a new file and SwiftUI view, card view. So it's the same name as what I have created before. It's important that it's the same name. Okay, I have my card view. It's going to complain. Why? Because it has a conflict. So in SwiftUI, notice that compared to React, I don't need to import anything. In React, you have to import, okay, if I want to use this, I have to import it. In SwiftUI, it's all shared. And that's the beauty of it. But at the same time, if you have the same name, you're going to have a conflict, which is why you cannot have card view here and you cannot have card view here. But this code is the same as this code with more content, which is why I'm just going to move all of this code to my new file so that I only focus on what is necessary here. So when I move that out, you can see that I have a problem. I'm going to go to card view and paste it here. So I'm just replacing the code and creating my component to be separate from my main view. There you go. Okay, that's it. So this is a component and these are views. These are main screens. And it's referencing that component from here. Now I'm going to do the same for my my main screens. And the next main screen that I want to create is going to be called home view. All right, so this is my home view, and it's important that you understand how to move your code, right? Because eventually you're gonna need to move your code. You can't rely everything on content view. Content view can't be where you put your thousands of lines of code. I mean, at some point it's gonna become unmanageable. So I'm going to move everything from the navigation view to the end of the navigation view, including the navigation view, cut it, Command X, okay, and move that to my home view. And there you go. So it should work exactly the same as before. And back to my index.html, which is called contentview.swift, I'm going to reference home view. Okay, so this is the same as all of that code that I just moved. And hopefully it's working. Yeah, it should be working. I don't think I need a container here. And yeah, succeeded. By the way, you can always like Command B to build to make sure that your code is always working. And if you want to clean your build, you can do Shift Command and K to clean it. Sometimes you have conflicts. Sometimes you have imported images and you have created new components and it doesn't detect those things. So sometimes you have to restart your Xcode as well. But as you can see, I'm just moving things around, and it's important to understand how to do that. Otherwise, you're stuck to one single file, and it's not going to be pretty after a few hours of coding. And so I have my content view, which is kind of like my index.html, and I'm referencing the home view, which is the view that we created earlier. I have my detail view, which is navigatable from each of those cards. And now, with this structure in place, I can finally create my tab bar. So in order to create a tab bar, okay, of course I can put this in its own file, but for the sake of simplicity, let's put it in content view. Okay, so the first thing is I need to create a container, and it's going to be called tab view. Okay, once I do that, you're going to see this little tab bar right here. And for each of those items, so home view is an item, I need a modifier called tab item. And then I can customize the content of my tab item. So as you can see, as soon as I did that, I have a label right here. If I want to customize that, text, and let's name it home. If I want to have an icon, this is where the SF symbol can come to be really useful. So I'm going to set, let's say, home, or yeah, home. I can use one of these. I can copy the name, and you don't need to import any icon from Figma because it's all built in SwiftUI. So let me show you how to do that. I'm going to set image, and it's called system name, and it's using a string. So a string is a double quote. Sorry. And then we're going to use the name right here. So in this case, it's called house. You can also copy by doing copy name, so Command Shift and C. So for example, if I want to use house field, Command Shift and C, and paste. So you notice that how the icon is changing without me having to import anything, which is beautiful. And it's all adapted to all the platforms of Apple. And that's what you need to do. So if I want to add a new tab, I'm going to reference detail view, and detail view is also going to need the same modifier called tab item. And we can just bring the same content within that. And so there you go. That's it. So I can use another one. I don't know, eyes, like this one. Command Shift C and paste that. So I have access to more than 2,400 icons so far that is available is in SF symbols. I didn't need to design anything. This is what I actually use in the design. In fact, all of these icons that you see here, including the back button and the close button, are all using SF symbols. So, you know, each has a name. So for example, the close button is called X mark, and you can just copy and paste this directly into Xcode here and paste here. So if I want to use a back, you know, let's say I want to use this icon, copy, paste right here, and it works. Now, the only thing that you need to use to be able to do that is to use the SF Pro text. And as I mentioned before, in terms of resources, make sure to download the fonts. So the fonts here, click on fonts, and all of these fonts are also free as long as you use them for Apple platforms. So SF Pro is what I'm using, and SF Symbols is going to be able to work with any of these fonts as long as they're installed and they're set properly in Figma. And when you translate that to code, then you just need to copy the name of the icon, and then you put that here as part of a system name for your image. And we have access to over 2,400 SF symbols provided by Apple, and you know, you don't need to do anything else. It's just beautiful. Now let's take a look at the navigation itself. This is your app, okay? And you have a main navigation switching back and forth. Boom. That's all you need to do, right? Like, look at that. It's so simple. And it's fully working, it's fully functional. And you can customize a lot of these things. So at some point, let's see, I can definitely cover a little bit the list view, because let's say the tab view, the second view, I don't want the detail view, right? I want to use it for a list. So let me create a new one. All right, list view. Okay, let's resume this. All right. So let's start from scratch. And this is going to be fun because it's so simple. You have your text, embed in VStack. Instead of VStack, I'm going to set scroll view. And then I also want to use embed in VStack again. I'm going to use a navigation view. Okay, in order to have a title, navigation title, and let's say this is called courses. Let's play this. Looks like this. And instead of scroll view, what I can also use is a list. And in fact, like this. So when you change this to a list from a scroll view or a VStack, it's still scrollable, and you have access to kind of like the main layout for the list view. So you can also do like a for each, just like the way we did before. We can repeat this. So repeat. Boom, you have like multiple lines. Now, let's create the layout that we have from Figma. So this is another basic layout that every single designer and developer needs to learn. It's super common. So let's try to recreate this super easily. We have the title. Okay. And we have the second text. So before doing that, I might want to put this inside a VStack first. And I want to, text. Okay. So I want to be able to align this to the left. Maybe I should use the inspector so that it's faster. All right. I'm gonna use the inspector because it's just faster. All right. So spacing, let's say 4. And maybe my VStack is gonna have a little bit of padding, and maybe I can set it top and bottom. Whoops, I don't know what's going on. Top and bottom. Did I mess up something here? But it shouldn't. Vertical. Let's see. Okay, so anyways, I have my VStack, and maybe I want to put an icon to the left as well. So let's do that. I'm going to put this instead in HStack. Okay, this is not updating. Oh, okay, that's why. I was wondering why the padding was not working. Is because whenever you see this little loading sign, that means that your system is working, right? Like the hamsters are working, and it's not working yet. It's not like fully loaded yet. So very important to pay attention to that. Yes, so I don't know what's going on, but it's not showing. So it's hard for me to teach when I'm not showing it. Okay, it's back. Okay, we're back in business. Thank you very much. All right, so we're gonna bring, like, let's say an SF symbol just for the sake of, you know, simplicity. So I'm gonna use image system name, and let's say use eyes. That's what I can remember right now. So the same with the alignment. For VStack, you can align horizontally, but for HStack, you can align vertically. So now I'm going to align to the top so that my icon goes to the top, like this. Okay, and whoa, what's going on? Oh yeah, I have some extra padding. Okay, the padding should be on the HStack and not on the VStack. Okay, this should be good now. So let's say I want to set a frame for my eyes. So I can set a frame of, let's say, width 36, 36, and maybe we can set some background. Color dot black, and then you want to also maybe mask it inside a circle. So that's another thing that you can do, just like in Sketch or in Figma, you can mask it using any shape underneath. So in this case, I'm going to use a circle. Okay, so obviously my eyes are black and the background is black, so maybe I want to use foreground color to dot white. Another thing that you can do is use multicolor icons, which is kind of cool. So in order to do that, you're going to need to enable the multicolor option. Go to multicolor. And yes, I have search here. Make sure the search is not active. Go to multicolor. Let's say I want to use, I don't know, this beautiful sun haze. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to put that instead of eyes. And see, by default, it's going to use the foreground color. Even if I remove it, it's going to be black. But what I can do is use rendering mode to original. And there you go. So this is using the multicolor icons from SF symbols. And you know, you can also change the size by using the font, because it's essentially a font icon, which means that if it's a font icon, you're gonna need to you can use the font size, such as, you know, using dynamic type is gonna make it much bigger, or using a body text, it's gonna be smaller. I think body text is the default size. So that's how you customize the size of the icon. And yeah, you know, now we can essentially create a component for each of these items. So let me do that. I'm going to create a new file, and Let's name this one list item. So you're gonna get used to the structure. You always have the name of type view, you have the body, and then you have your main UI, right? The same with React or Flutter, they always start with this filler kind of code that sets the structure. And you're gonna get used to it. Once you get used to it, you're gonna easily move around code the same way that I'm doing right now. So for example, I don't want it to be here, so maybe I want to create this as a component, and I'm going to replace that here. And when I do that, I need to reference my component to list item parentheses, and it's going to do the same thing. All right. So in terms of the list, if you want to call the navigation link, is the same thing. You can also use another thing called a modal. So you can call a modal inexpensively in SwiftUI. It does all the work for you. The only thing you need is what we call a state. So what is a state? A state is when you want you want to have sort of like different state, a beginning and an end. So for example, for animation, you know that if you want to animate, you need to have the starting point and the end point. The same when you open a web page or a page from a website, you need to know that, okay, right now my modal is not showing, but when I click on this button, it's going to show the modal. So in order to manage that, you need something what we call state. So at state var show is equal to false. So this means that by default, I don't want to show my modal. So if I want to show it, I'm going to add a modifier. And thanks to the magic of SwiftUI, all I need to do is use something called .sheet. And .sheet is going to is presented and then the content. So is presented is using the binding. The binding is $, and the name of my state. So binding allows me to synchronize across multiple views the state that I have. Again, these are things that we're going to learn later on, but you just need to know that we need to use the state name plus the $, and we call the content. So in this case, what is it? Detail view parentheses. So now I also need to change the state. So what is the event? What this does is simply saying, if my state is true, then I'm going to present to you this new view. But I don't have an event yet. So I need to create an event. So on any element, you can create an event. For example, on tap gesture. So on tap gesture is when you tap on the element and something is going to happen. In this case, we're going to switch the state called show. So show .toggle. So toggle means it's going to switch back and forth between true or false. So essentially what all of this code is doing is just saying, okay, by default, I don't want to show my modal. And if I'm showing it on tap, then I'm going to present the detail view. That's what this code is doing. And look at the magic. I tap on it, boom, look at that. Boom, that's all I need to do. Just a few lines of code. All I need to do is just set the sheet, set the state, and then set the event. And now I can present my UI through the modal. Isn't that magical? I mean, it's just beautiful. You didn't have to do much, right? We don't have to do much work to get like a lot of cool things here. And so, I have my list view now, so I can connect it to my application. So let me go back to content view where I have my tab view, which controls everything. Yes, this needs to update. I don't know why it's not updating. Okay. All right. And instead of detail view, what do we put? We put the list view. So now I have my main screen here. and I have my second screen here. If I want to go to the detail view, I can do it like this, or I can do it like this. So let's see. There's also another thing you can do. There are different styles of presentation for the modal, which could be really exciting. For example, you can set a full screen modal. So let's see, it's a list view. And the only thing you need to change in SwiftUI is something called full screen cover. That's it. That's all you need to do. And so when I tap on it, boom, it does a full screen mode. But when you do that, of course, you need to set your own close button. And we're not going to cover that today, but I just wanted to show you that this is what you can do. But otherwise, you can use the dot sheet. By the way, all of these things that I might not be covering today is available in all the tutorials, including the SwiftUI by example, also my SwiftUI courses and handbook. So, we can't cover everything, of course, but I wanted to give you a good head start in terms of what is necessary to create a basic app that can be, that can grow into something so much more interesting than this, right? And so we covered a lot of things today already. We covered, how to get started, how to organize our files, how to set components, how to create a basic layout, how to set a tab view, a navigation view, and how to connect everything together to make a real app. This is not some fake app. This is a real app using real development techniques that we use in a production app. And so I think that's really exciting. What else can I show you? But it's already an hour and 41. So if you can build this on iPhone 12 Pro Max, in this case, doing Command R or clicking on the play button, and it's going to build for the first time. It's going to maybe necessitate about 2 minutes. Yeah, I wanted to show you a little bit of data, like static data for fun. So maybe we can do that. In the meantime, though, I think it's important to give you some direction in terms of how you should be organizing your files. And essentially, where we organize our apps, we have about 3 or 4 folders that are in every single app. The first one, so let me right-click on content view. And typically, you put the sidebar and the top bar and the content view here. New group from selection, and we're going to name this one navigation. So this is where you're going to put sidebar, navbar, sidebar, tab bar, content view. And then you have the main views. Okay, so new group from selection again. I'm going to name this views. So this is where you're going to put your main screens. So your home screen, list screen, detail screen, any full screen is going to be right here. And of course, as your project grows, you can have subfolders. So for example, in our production app, as I've shown you in a previous live stream, we have modals, we have main views, we have detail views and stuff like that. And then also, another one that is really important is components. So new group, I'm going to call this one components. So that's it. Now I just need to open and close every single view. All right. And resume. So navigation, views, and components. Sure, at the beginning, you're going to do everything in content view, and that's totally normal. Don't feel ashamed. Everyone does that. But eventually, you're going to need to create multiple views, multiple components, and the navigation. So that the navigation view, the tab bar, the sidebar, the content view kind of bring out your main views. And then, yeah, and I guess we can cover quickly the data. So right now, as you can see, every single card is the same, right? Like they have the same data. So what I want to show you, and I think this is important because if you want to create an app, even though we're not going to cover the API part, I think it's important to know how do we kind of start a data model and how can we loop through that data quite easily. So let's do that. I'm going to create a new file and I'm going to call this one data. And this is not scary. I know a lot of people make data to be very scary, but my goal is to make everything approachable for you. So right now, every single view starts with the main structure and then the preview structure. This code here is necessary for the preview. In fact, if you remove this code, it's not going to break your app. It's just going to remove the preview, and that's it. So, that's one thing you need to know. So in this case, we're not focusing on the layout, which means that we're going to remove this. All we need is import SwiftUI, and we're going to create the data model. So struct and the name of the model. So we're going to start with item. This is the most common name, and it's going to be of type identifiable. And now we're creating the data structure. What is a data structure? The data structure is like saying, okay, my components, what kind of overrides do I have with that component, right? So just like in Figma, you're like, well, every single card has a gradient, has a title, has a description, and has an image. So I just need to reflect that structure in my app. So, and as a result, the only thing that is extra is the ID. So var ID, I'm going to set UUID so that I auto-generate the ID. I don't have to worry about setting manually the ID. So it's going to auto-generate for me. Now, we're going to set the title and of type string. So when it's equal, it means that we're setting a default value. When we're setting the colon, it means that we're setting the type, the data type, because everything has to play nicely. A string has to work in certain ways. A Boolean has to work in certain ways, and that's why the data type is very important. So after that, we're going to have the text, which is also a string. We're going to have an image, which is also a string. And so we can definitely start with that. Now, we could stop here, but when it comes to prototyping and creating some static data for your app, and not everyone needs API data, right? So if you want, you can just put all your data inside your app and just code everything here. It's just every time you need to change something, you might have to update your app. But look, we're beginners, right? Like we don't need to create a rocket ship, in the first day. So let's create some sample data. Var items, so that's the name of my sample data, is equal to square brackets. Again, open and close. And this means it's an array. What is an array? An array is a list of items. It's a collection of items. And what I want to set as a collection is my data model. So I'm going to reference my data model called item, parentheses. And when I do that, then I have the auto completion for each of these overrides, right? And so title, we're going to set, some of these data. So the same thing I did manually for each, I'm going to do it here. Think of it as your CMS, right? This is like CMS 1.0 before we get into Contentful and the full-on solution. This is your CMS 1.0, right? So I have my text, okay? Boom. And then I have the name of my image. So blob 1. That's it. Not complicated, right? This is not rocket science. Everyone can do this. So let me go back to my home view. And let's see. So my home view, if I resume the preview, By the way, thank you so much for the comments. If you enjoy these streams, please give a thumbs up and tell me what you like so I know exactly what I can sort of focus on in next live streams. So here I have the card view, and the card view is you can comment click on each of these components, and you can do jump to definition. It's going to go directly to the component, and this is my component. Now, what is happening here is that every single data here is hard-coded, but I don't want to hard-code everything. What I want to do is to use dynamic data from my CMS 1.0. All right, so first of all we need to do is to set a variable item, and it's going to be of type item, which is the data model that I just created, and equal sign, which is the default value, the default item that I want to use, and in this case, the array that I just created, plus square bracket and the index within that array, and in this case is 0. That's it. So this is going to get the data from what I have created from my data here. So whatever data here is going to be applied to my card view. So in order to apply that, okay, but first of all, let's create some more data. I mean, it's kind of boring to have a only single item. All right, so first of all, you need to separate everything with a comma. So comma, and then I'm going to copy and paste more stuff. And so let me try this one. So maybe this one. And we're not going to change everything, but blob 2 and then blob 3, and then let's try this one. All right, so now we have 3. Maybe we're going to add a fourth one. And let's say this one. All right. I think we only have 3 blobs, so I'm going to use illustration 1. There you go. So these are my sample data, and just important to really respect the structure. Otherwise, it's going to break. So those are the rules. And let's apply that data. So right now, I'm using the first index, the first value of my array, my collection of items. And I'm going to apply this item. So starting with the name of the image. So it's going to be item.image. Boom, that's it. And then title, item.title. Text, item.text. And I think that's it, right? Now, you might have noticed nothing is changing, but look at the magic here. If I change this to 1, resume. All right, let's cross fingers. Boom, look at that. The image change and the title change as well. Set it to 3, resume again, and it's going to change it. But the thing is, it can be even more powerful than that. You can essentially change also the gradient. And let me show you, because right now we have only changed the string value. And as long as it's using double quotes and the string value, you can do that. That's no problem. But what if you have like very specific value types, such as the gradient? So let's do that. Var gradient, and whenever you add something, you will have to also change the structure of your data. So I'm going to show you that. First of all, gradient, I'm going to set the type, which is linear gradient. And yeah, it's a linear gradient. So once you do that, you're going to need to apply all of these to all of the missing structures, right? There you go. And for each of these gradients, we're going to copy it from Figma. All right, this one. Okay. This one. And the fourth one. Boom. So now I have my gradient stored in my sample data. All I need to do is to apply that to my actual card. And here you can see that I'm using a linear gradient. Make sure to respect the parentheses. And there you go. Delete that, delete linear gradient. And now I'm going to set item dot gradient. Look at that. All right, so I think I'm going to need to build because it needs to update the data. As long as you have build succeeded, you should be fine. So yeah, it's taking a little bit of time for this stream. Sorry, apologize, but I'm trying to cover a lot of things that I feel is necessary for creating your first app. And boom, see, look at that. It changed the gradients at the same time. Okay. And I can change the data directly from my CMS 1.0, right? Look at how cool that is, right? And I think that's just so, friendly if you think about it. Like a lot of people are scared of data, but when you distill it to its essence, that's when you can understand enough to be able to play it on your own afterwards. So now that I have my data, this is not yet applied to my home view. So let's do that. Okay, so everything is set to the default that I set in my card view, right? Whatever I put in my card view as a default is going to show right here. But what if I want to make it dynamic, right? Let's do that. What I'm going to do here, instead of for each set to a manually set value of 5 items, look at that, items, boom, that's all I need to do. So now I'm going to have 4 cards. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, this is from my data that I just created. And what if I want to customize the content? Look at that. Parentheses, I pass the item, boom, and whatever I receive from this loop, I pass it, item here, and voila. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? That's all I needed to do. And I have a dynamic app. This is not some fake app. This is a real dynamic app. And that's all I need to do. So that's what I wanted to show you. And obviously practicing is going to allow you to do a lot of those things. And maybe before we end, we can look at a new feature in SwiftUI called Lazy Grid. This is a portion that it's a little bit harder for me because I haven't mastered Lazy Grid yet, but there's just a lot of structure to set. But first, let me show you. So what we're gonna do here is to set a layout that looks like this. It's a grid layout, and the grid layout is super adaptive against any layout possible. So you can put 2, 3 columns, 4 columns. It's gonna fit automatically against any type of screen size, and I think that's beautiful. So let me show you the basics of it today, because I feel like this is a really important thing to do for layout. So let me start with the title, text, and we're gonna put recent courses. We're gonna align this to the left. I like to use frame.maxwidth.infinity and then use alignment to leading instead of using an h-tag spacer. And we're gonna use padding. So this avoids having like a pyramid of doom or something like that. And maybe I can also change the font size. So font subheadline. So now we're going to bring a card. But this card has a very custom size. And what I want to use is a card that is flexible. So I'm going to create a new card and I'm going to copy the code. And yeah, we don't have a choice because we want to use different types of cards. We don't want to use just this big card. We also want to use a small card, but both have very similar structure. So I'm going to call this one small card view. And as we've learned, we just need to copy whatever is inside the VStack and the modifiers. So anything inside the body content, I'm going to copy that and put that in the small card view. And it should be exactly the same. But oh yes, I forgot. We also need to bring the data. If I don't have the data, then it's going to break. All right. So the item data, because I'm referencing the data, otherwise it's going to break. It's not going to know what I'm talking about. And so now I'm just going to change the size. First of all, let me see. We have 222 in terms of height. And we want to make sure that the width is not fixed because we want to fit as many as we can. And the same with the image, it's set to 99. So the image is going to be 99. And the title is going to be of size headline. So title headline. Okay. And I don't believe we need the second description. So I can remove that. And there you go. Looks pretty good. So now that I have a flexible size, I can now fit into a lazy grid, which is a flexible grid layout, because you want to make sure that we can fit as many columns as possible within a size of a screen. So I'm going to go to home view, and yeah, let me make some bold here. And we're going to reference the small card view, parentheses. Okay. See, it's taking the maximum size by default. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put this into a VStack first. Okay. But instead of a VStack, I'm going to use lazy VStack. Okay. The difference is you can have multiple columns that's going to be spread across multiple, multiple items, multiple rows, and that's the difference between the two. But the thing is, I need to customize the VStack. But first, let me just repeat this. Boom. It's going to create 5 cards. Okay. But I want to use my dynamic data instead. So items, and we're going to pass item. So every single card is unique now, using the data that I set in my CMS 1.0. And now I'm going to use a lazy VStack, and I'm going to customize it. So this is this is the part where I don't remember. I think is, let me just reference my code, because this is the only part that I can't remember for the life of me. So I just need to double check the code. So it's in the view, and again, like a lot of these things is in the source file. So if you want to check. All right, so columns and grid item adaptive. So parentheses, columns, and it's of type grid item, parentheses. Okay, and the grid item is going to be inside an array, right? So because we have multiple items. Like this. Now the grid items have multiple elements, and by the way, if you want to learn more about lazy grid, you can find that in SwiftUI by example, but also here. So lazy stacks, I have like the sample project, the video that explains from scratch everything. But yeah, what I'm looking for is exactly like this one. So grid item, adaptive, and minimum size for each of the item. And so I'm going to set that dot adaptive, and I can set the minimum and maximum. I don't need the maximum, so I'm just going to focus on the minimum size. I'm going to set this to 160. So hopefully this works, and hopefully I didn't Yeah, it's VStack. It's lazy grid, VGrid, and not VStack. Sorry. All right, boom. Look at that. Look at that. So if I made it smaller, for example, I don't know, 100. See, it's trying to fit as many items as possible within the space that I have, and that's beautiful. And you can have, if I have a bigger screen, it's going to fit more items for me as long as I respect the rules of my minimum size. And because of lazy grid, you can create really interesting layout that is fully adaptive across all the screen sizes. Now, if you want to set the padding, I know a lot of designers are like, oh my God, man, please add some padding. All right, let's do that. Padding, okay. Okay, and then you want a spacing between the items. So I believe adaptive, I think is spacing here, if I remember. So this is horizontally between the items, and then the grid item itself, no, sorry, the lazy grid itself has a spacing between rows. So 16. Boom. There you go. All right. So if I want to add more, like 30, if I want to add more, like 30, automatically updates everything and fits everything within the screen. And that's just beautiful, right? We want the code to do all the work for us so that every single thing is customized and easy to to make it dynamic. So I can also do the same with the navigation. So I can just put the navigation destination. And now each of these cards are also giving me the navigation. And I have my app that is going to run on my iOS simulator. All right. This is the final part. Look at that. This is your app. You can test it. You can test it on your phone right now if you want. You can just like connect it using USB, run that, select that. As long as you have it connected using USB and you have signed into your developer account, it's going to create a certificate for you, and you can select your phone. So in this case, it's Meng's iPhone, and I'm gonna be able to run this app that I just created today in less than 2 hours together. And look at that. We have even dynamic content using our little CMS. We have multiple tabs. We've learned so much about different navigations, about basic layouts. Of course, we can fix the padding here. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope this is really useful for you. And I hope this demystified a lot of things for iOS development. Now, some small things that I want to mention, which is really, really good to know, is that you can change the preview here, and you can duplicate the preview. And again, the preview is all of this code here. So if you want, you can have, let's say, a second preview. Okay, and this second preview, you want to have, make sure to select this first, or scroll to that specific preview, and you can set, let's say, this to be an iPad Pro, and you want to test it in dark mode, let's say. So let's, yeah, gotta love their preloader here, right? Like a giant iPhone first before it shows as an iPad Pro. I hope they're gonna improve this little placeholder thing. So let's change this to a layout color scheme, dark. All right, so it's still loading. Again, pay attention to this little activity indicator. Sometimes you're like, okay, why is my preview not updating? Well, that's because it's still loading, and your computer is fuming. And just gotta pay attention to some of these details. Yeah, it seems to be taking a while, probably because it's a big screen. But otherwise, I can show you from here how it looks like. Color scheme dark, and boom, there you go. My app is even adapted to light mode, including the nav bar, the tab bar. In fact, let me go to the content view, and let's switch this one to color scheme dark. Because the thing is, as long as you're not customizing the colors, you're not like setting, oh, this color has to be white, this color has to be black. If you're not setting those colors manually, it's going to work automatically in dark mode. So you can see, including the nav bar, okay, and the tab bar, look at that. The translucency and everything, the modal, yeah, so here, this is supposed to be, no, I think this is definitely supposed to work with dark mode, but oops, never mind. Let me show on the simulator first, because when you test it on the simulator, you're gonna have these options from here, which is also really good to know. So when you test in the simulator, the options are here at the bottom of Xcode instead. So I'm gonna click here, and you can change the appearance, also the accessibility, and this is why it's so important to use dynamic type. So this is my iOS app, and look at how beautiful it is in dark mode, right? Like, so pretty. And so I can change to light mode. It's gonna take a little bit of time, yes. And dark mode, I can also change the title size. Look at that. Sure, I can spend more time on, like making sure that the cards are kind of dynamically sized more. So these are the kind of things that you want to spend more time on. But the fact that I'm using dynamic type, so dot headline, dot title, dot body, and dot large title, is what allows the users to be able to customize the font size. And as we all know, as you get older, including myself, of course, we want to use big fonts in the phone. And I think it's important to enable these things and to use dynamic type. You have also some of these really cool options, such as increase contrast to see how it looks like. And I think this is what kind of like does by itself on, let's say, the tab bar. You can see that the icons becomes more contrasty, and you can also reduce the transparency, which means that anytime you use the blurred layers, it's not going to use that sort of like translucency anymore, and that is all for accessibility. So yeah, like, I'm absolutely excited. I see a question about, are you excited about M1? Yes, I'm going to order in less than 2 weeks the new iMac, and I'm so excited to get it next to my Pro XDR. So I'm gonna answer some questions, and then we can end this stream. But thank you so much for anyone who has stuck around for about 2 hours and 15 minutes so far. I'm gonna answer some questions. So yes, you're gonna be able to download the code. This is available for our subscribers. And all right, a lot of great comments. Thank you so much. I think we don't have a lot of questions, do we? All right. So yes, just want to end this by saying that WWDC is really very, very soon. So, be excited. We have a lot of new content coming and these live streams, I hope they're going to help you introduce to the world of iOS, to the world of design, to the world of development and code and React and Flutter. And we have so much content coming, and of course, Please, if you enjoy this, go to our website, subscribe, download all of these design files that we have available for you so that you can just start, study yourself, look at how we do things. We spend hundreds and hundreds of hours creating these, and we have all the source files, all the videos for our premium customers. If you're not a customer, that's fine. You can read the text, you can get the code. But if you're a customer, you get the video, which explains everything from scratch, and you have the download for every single video as well. So the downloads is what you might expect from a project like this one. So we share all the source files, all the source code, so that you compare against your own progress. So again, thank you so much everyone for following this live stream. If you enjoyed it, give us a thumbs up and subscribe, bell notification on. I'll see you next week at 3 p.m. Bye-bye.